The phone slipped from my trembling hands and clattered onto the kitchen counter. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my memory like a brand. Mom's becoming such a burden. Maybe it's time we looked into nursing homes. I can't keep dealing with her neediness. My son Michael had left his phone behind when he rushed out to pick up his daughter from school. It had buzzed with a text, and thinking it might be important about my granddaughter, I'd glanced at it. Instead, I found a conversation between Michael and someone named Jessica that made my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. This story will shock you, so make sure to like and subscribe. Drop a comment with your city name. My name is Elena Perez. I'm 57 years old, and I thought I had raised my son better than this. At 57, I'm hardly ancient. Sure, I'd been asking Michael for help more often since my arthritis flared up last winter. But a burden? The word echoed in my mind as I paced around the kitchen island, my hands shaking with a mixture of hurt and rage. Michael David Perez, my 32-year-old son, had always been the responsible one. After his father died 3 years ago, he'd stepped up, checking on me weekly, helping with heavy groceries, fixing things around the house. I thought we were close. I thought he cared. But apparently, behind my back, he was complaining about me to this Jessica person, whoever she was. The front door opened, and I heard familiar footsteps. Elena? I saw Michael's car in the driveway earlier. It was my daughter, Carmen Perez, Michael's younger sister by 2 years. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and often stopped by after her shifts to check on me. Unlike Michael, who lived 20 minutes away, Carmen had bought a house just 3 blocks over when she got divorced last year. He left his phone, I called out, my voice catching slightly. I quickly wiped my eyes and tried to compose myself, but Carmen had always been perceptive. She appeared in the doorway, still in her purple scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Before I could answer, another voice chimed in from the living room. Elena, honey, I brought those tomatoes from my garden. My neighbor and closest friend, Dorothy Martinez, had let herself in through the back door, as she always did. At 62, Dorothy had been my rock since moving in next door 8 years ago. We'd bonded over morning coffee, shared recipes, and supported each other through my husband's illness and death. Dorothy bustled into the kitchen carrying a basket of bright red tomatoes, but her cheerful expression faded when she saw my face. What happened? You look upset. I glanced between Carmen and Dorothy, these 2 women who had become my anchors in the storm of grief and adjustment that had been my life since losing Roberto. They genuinely cared about me, which made Michael's words sting even more. I accidentally saw something on Michael's phone, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. He's been talking to someone about putting me in a nursing home. He called me a burden. Carmen's face darkened immediately. He said what? Dorothy set down her basket with more force than necessary. That boy needs a reality check. Elena, you're one of the most independent women I know. I picked up Michael's phone again, my hands steadier now with my support system around me. Look at this conversation. He's been discussing my living situation with this Jessica person, like I'm some kind of problem to be solved. Carmen moved closer, reading over my shoulder. Her jaw tightened with each word. Who is Jessica? I've never heard Michael mention anyone by that name. I have no idea, I admitted, but apparently she knows enough about my life to have opinions about where I should live. Dorothy shook her head, her silver curls bouncing with indignation. In my day, children took care of their parents with pride, not resentment. Your Roberto would be furious if he could see this. The mention of my late husband brought fresh tears to my eyes. Roberto and I had raised our children to value family above all else. We'd sacrificed so much to give them good lives, college educations, and strong moral foundations. Had I failed somewhere along the way? Maybe he has a point, I said quietly, sinking onto one of the kitchen stools. Maybe I have been asking for too much help lately. Absolutely not, Carmen said firmly. Mom, you ask for help with heavy lifting because of your arthritis, and you invite us over for dinner because you're lonely. That's not being a burden. That's being human. Dorothy nodded emphatically. Elena, after my Harold passed, you were here every single day making sure I ate, helping me sort through his belongings, driving me to appointments when I was too emotional to drive myself. Did I ever call you a burden? That's different, I protested weakly. No, it's not, Carmen said. And furthermore, you're 57 years old, not 87. You work part-time at the library, you volunteer at the food bank, you take care of your own house and yard. What exactly makes you such a burden? I stared at Michael's phone screen again, rereading the messages that had turned my world upside down. There were several exchanges over the past few weeks, all discussing my situation as if I were an invalid instead of a woman who occasionally needed help reaching high shelves or moving furniture. I just don't understand, I said, my voice breaking. When did I become such an inconvenience to my own son? Carmen wrapped her arms around me, and I breathed in the familiar scent of her vanilla perfume mixed with hospital antiseptic. You're not an inconvenience, Mom. Something else is going on here. Dorothy pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. I'm doing some detective work. Jessica isn't exactly an uncommon name, but if she's influencing Michael's decisions about you, we need to know who she is. Just then, we heard Michael's key in the front door. Mom, I left my phone here somewhere. The three of us exchanged glances. Carmen squeezed my shoulder reassuringly, while Dorothy quickly pocketed her own phone. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for a confrontation I never thought I'd have to have with my own child. In here, Michael, I called out, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He appeared in the doorway, looking harried and checking his watch. Sorry to rush, but I need to grab my phone and get back. Sarah's got soccer practice in an hour, and I still need to stop by the grocery store. I held up his phone, watching his face carefully. Here it is. It's been buzzing quite a bit. Thanks, Mom. He reached for it, but I didn't immediately let go. Michael, we need to talk. Something in my tone must have alerted him because his eyes darted between me, Carmen, and Dorothy. Is everything okay? You all look serious. That depends, Carmen said coolly, on whether you want to explain why you've been discussing putting Mom in a nursing home behind her back. The color drained from Michael's face, and I knew in that moment that everything I'd read was true. My son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep, helped with homework, cheered for at baseball games, and supported through college, really did see me as a burden. But what I discovered next was a small detail that blew the whole thing open. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He glanced at his phone in my hand, then back at our faces, clearly calculating how much we might have seen. Mom, I can explain, he started, but his voice cracked on the words. Then explain, I said, finally releasing his phone. My hands were trembling, but I kept my gaze steady on his face. This was my son, the person I'd trusted above all others, and I needed to understand how we'd gotten to this point. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood whenever he was caught in trouble. It's not what it looks like. Really? Dorothy interjected, her voice sharp. Because it looks like you've been planning to ship your mother off to a care facility without bothering to include her in the conversation. Dorothy, please, I said quietly. As angry as I was, I needed to hear this from Michael himself, not through accusations and defenses. Michael sank into the armchair across from us, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. Jessica thinks it would be better for everyone if you had more support. Professional support. Jessica? Carmen repeated flatly. Your girlfriend of what, 6 months? 8 months, Michael corrected, then seemed to realize how that sounded. But this isn't just about Jessica. I've been worried about you too, Mom. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Worried about what, exactly? You're getting older, and you live alone in this big house. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one's here to help? His words came out in a rush, as if he'd been rehearsing this conversation. At a nice facility, there would be people around all the time. Activities, medical care right there if you need it. I'm 57, Michael. I'm not decrepit. The hurt in my voice was impossible to hide. I work, I volunteer, I maintain this house just fine. But for how long? He pressed. And it's not just about you. Sarah has so many activities now, and with my job demands increasing, I'm stretched thin. If something happened to you, I'd have to drop everything. The brutal honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. Carmen's hand found mine and squeezed tight. So, this is about convenience, I said slowly. Your convenience. That's not fair, Mom. I'm trying to plan ahead to make sure you're taken care of. Without asking me what I want, Dorothy pointed out. Without even discussing it with her first. Michael's phone buzzed in his hand, and I saw Jessica's name flash on the screen. He glanced at it, then at us, clearly torn between answering and continuing this conversation. Answer it, I said. Don't let us keep you from more important things. Mom, please don't be like that. Like what? Like a burden? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. He flinched. I never said you were a burden? Not in those exact words, no. I stood up, needing to move, to do something with the energy coursing through me. But that's what you meant, isn't it? I'm becoming inconvenient to your life with Jessica. This isn't about Jessica, he insisted, but his phone buzzed again, and his eyes darted to it involuntarily. Carmen stood too, moving to stand beside me. You know what, Michael? Maybe you should go. Come back when you're ready to have an honest conversation with your mother, instead of trying to manage her like she's one of your work projects. I'm trying to help, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. Why can't you see that? Because help involves asking what someone needs, I replied, not deciding for them what's best and then making plans behind their back. Michael's phone rang this time, Jessica's name lighting up the screen. He looked at it, then at me, clearly struggling with what to do. Take it, I said tiredly. We both know you want to. He answered on the 4th ring. Hey, Jessica. No, I'm still at my mom's. We're having a discussion about... Yes, about that. He paused, listening. I don't know how long this will take. I could hear Jessica's voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. Whatever she was saying made Michael's jaw tighten. I understand you have plans, he said into the phone, but this is important. Another pause. Fine. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. We need to finish this conversation later. Do we? I asked. It seems like you've already made your decision. I haven't decided anything yet. That's why I was discussing options. Options that don't include keeping me in my own home. Mom, be realistic. This house is too big for one person, And you're not getting any younger? Dorothy made a sound of disgust. She's not ancient, Michael. She's barely middle-aged. I know that, he snapped. But I also know that things change quickly sometimes. My friend Dave's mother seemed fine one day and was in the hospital with a broken hip the next. These facilities have waiting lists. If we don't plan ahead? I interrupted. Or if you don't plan ahead for me. Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and I saw his expression change, becoming more closed off. I really do need to go, he said, standing up. Jessica's waiting, and Sarah needs to be picked up soon. Of course she does, Carmen muttered. As Michael headed toward the door, he turned back one more time. Mom, I love you. Everything I'm thinking about is because I want what's best for you. Then next time, I said, try asking me what I think is best for me. After he left, the three of us sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Dorothy pulled out her phone again. What are you doing? I asked. Looking up Jessica Martinez, she said grimly, because I have a feeling there's more to this story than Michael is telling us. What she found on Jessica's social media made everything suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Dorothy's face went pale as she scrolled through her phone. Oh, honey, she said quietly, her voice taking on that careful tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. What did you find? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Carmen leaned over to look at Dorothy's screen. Is that Jessica's Facebook page? It is. Dorothy turned the phone so I could see it. Look at this post from 3 days ago. The post showed a photo of a beautifully decorated living room with hardwood floors and large windows. The caption read, "Finally found our dream house. Can't wait to make this our forever home. Just need to work out a few family logistics first, but everything is falling into place perfectly." I stared at the image, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. When did Michael start looking at assisted living places? You said he mentioned it was recent, right? Carmen asked. Like this week? Dorothy kept scrolling. There's more. Look at this one from last week. She showed me another post, this one a photo of Jessica and Sarah at what looked like an open house. House hunting with my favorite girl. She loves the big backyard and the room that would be perfect for her art projects. That's a nice house, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. Looks expensive. Very expensive, Dorothy agreed. I looked up the neighborhood. Houses there are going for at least twice what Michael's current place is worth. Carmen was quiet for a moment, then said what we were all thinking. So Jessica finds her dream house, realizes they can't afford it on their current budget, and suddenly Michael is worried about you living alone and thinks you should sell this place. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This house, the one Michael grew up in, the one his father and I bought when Michael was just 2 years old. The house where I'd nursed Michael through chickenpox, where we'd celebrated every birthday and holiday, where his father had taught him to ride a bike in the driveway. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions, I said, though even as I said it, I knew I wasn't. Dorothy continued scrolling. There's a post from 2 weeks ago about Sarah needing to change schools because of exciting family changes coming up, and one from a month ago about how expensive Sarah's art classes are getting, but how they don't want to take opportunities away from her. Stop, I said. I don't need to see any more. But the pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Jessica's impatience on the phone calls, Michael's sudden urgency about my living situation. The way he'd avoided eye contact when talking about the assisted living facility. The fact that he'd been researching places without ever asking me how I felt about leaving my home. Carmen reached over and took my hand. I'm sorry, Margaret. This has to hurt. What hurts most is that he couldn't just talk to me, I said. If they need help with a down payment, if they're struggling financially, why couldn't he just ask? Why did he have to make it about me being a burden? Because asking for money is harder than convincing himself he's doing what's best for you, Dorothy said, setting her phone down. It's easier to be the dutiful son than the son who needs financial help from his mother. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Michael's father had planted 20 years ago. The roses were blooming beautifully this year, better than they had in years. I'd been so proud of how well I was maintaining everything. The thing is, I said, not turning around, I probably would have helped them. If Michael had come to me and explained the situation honestly, if he'd asked instead of manipulated, we could have figured something out together. Would you have sold the house? Carmen asked gently. I considered the question seriously. Maybe. If it was really what Michael needed, and if I felt like I had a real choice in the matter, maybe I would have. But not like this. Not with lies and manipulation and making me feel like I'm falling apart when I'm not. Dorothy joined me at the window. So what are you going to do? Before I could answer, I heard Michael's car pull back into the driveway. Through the window, I could see him getting out, but he wasn't alone. Jessica was with him, and she was walking toward my front door with the kind of determined stride that meant she was ready for a confrontation. Looks like I'm about to find out, I said, watching as Jessica reached my front door first and knocked with more force than was necessary. I should go, Carmen whispered, but I shook my head. Please stay, both of you. I think I'm going to need witnesses. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Dorothy squeezed my shoulder as I walked to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could see Jessica's silhouette through the frosted glass, her posture rigid with whatever speech she'd prepared during the drive over. I opened the door to find Jessica standing there with her arms crossed, Michael hovering behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. We need to talk, Jessica said without preamble, pushing past me into the living room. She stopped short when she saw Carmen and Dorothy. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. Dorothy and Carmen are staying, I said, closing the door with more force than necessary. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of them. Michael finally stepped forward, his face flushed. Mom, Jessica thinks maybe we've been moving too fast with the assisted living discussion. She wanted to come over and clear the air. Clear the air? I repeated, looking between them. Is that what we're calling it? Jessica shot Michael a look that could have cut glass. What I wanted to say is that I think there's been some miscommunication about our motivations here. Have there been? I asked, settling into my armchair. Carmen and Dorothy had moved to the couch, silent but present. Because I think I'm understanding your motivations perfectly clearly. Mom, Michael started, but Jessica held up a hand. No, let me handle this. She turned back to me, her voice taking on that condescending tone she used when she thought she was being patient. Margaret, I know change is scary at your age, but we really are thinking about what's best for you. At my age? I repeated slowly. You mean at the age where I'm apparently forgetting to pay bills and having dizzy spells and can't manage my own medication? Michael's face went pale. How did I what, Michael? How did I find out that you've been telling people I'm having health problems that don't exist? How did I discover that you've been painting me as a confused old woman who can't take care of herself? Jessica's composure cracked slightly. We never said you were confused. No, you just implied it. You just let people think it. You just used it to justify why you need to get me out of my house so quickly. I stood up, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Tell me, Jessica, how much do you need for the down payment? The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Jessica's mouth opened and closed without sound. I don't know what you think you know, Jessica finally said, but her voice had lost its edge. I know that Sarah needs to change schools because of exciting family changes. I know that you've been looking at houses in Brookfield. I know that her art classes are expensive, and you don't want to take opportunities away from her. I watched Jessica's face grow paler with each word. I know that you've been researching assisted living facilities for weeks, and that you need me to sell this house to make your new life work. Michael sank into the nearest chair. Mom, it's not like that. Then tell me what it's like, Michael. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you decided what you needed from me, then worked backward to create a story that would make me give it to you. We're genuinely worried about you, Jessica insisted, but the fight had gone out of her voice. Worried enough to lie to me? Worried enough to make me question my own competence? Worried enough to research facilities without asking how I felt about leaving the home I've lived in for 30 years? Dorothy leaned forward slightly. Maybe this is where you tell them the truth about what you really need. Michael looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means, I said, taking a deep breath, that if you had come to me honestly and said you were struggling, if you had asked for help instead of trying to manipulate me into giving it, we might have been able to work something out. You would have helped us? Michael's voice was small, younger than his 42 years. I might have, but now? I shook my head. Now I don't know if I can trust anything you tell me. How do I know what's real and what's just another story designed to get what you want? Jessica stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're the villains here. You made me feel like I was losing my mind, I said quietly. You made me doubt myself, question my own judgment, wonder if I was as incompetent as you were telling everyone I was. If that doesn't make you the villain, Jessica, what does? Michael buried his face in his hands. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, and now I have to figure out what's real and what isn't. I have to decide whether I can trust my own son. Carmen spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. Maybe you should tell them what you discovered about yourself this week? I looked at her gratefully. This week, while you were making me feel like I was falling apart, I balanced my checkbook perfectly. I organized my medications and took them exactly as prescribed. I maintained my garden, cooked my meals, and took care of everything that needed taking care of. I am not the burden you've been describing to people. You're not a burden at all, Michael said, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. Then why did you call me one? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see that this was the moment where everything would either break apart completely or finally, maybe, start to heal. Michael's shoulders sagged as he stared at his hands. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken resentments and fears. When he finally looked up, his face was raw with something I hadn't seen since he was a child, caught in a lie. Because I felt like one, he said quietly. I felt like a burden to you, and I guess I thought if I could make it seem like you were the problem instead of me, then maybe I wouldn't have to face how badly I've screwed up my life. Jessica shot him a sharp look. Michael, don't! No, Jess. She deserves the truth. He turned back to me. You want to know why I really wanted you in assisted living? Because every time I see you managing everything so perfectly, being so independent and capable, it reminds me of how much I'm failing at everything. Carmen leaned back in her chair, watching this unfold with the careful attention of someone who understood family dynamics better than most. You're not failing, I said, though my voice carried more confusion than comfort. Aren't I? Michael laughed bitterly. I'm 42 years old, Mom. I can barely keep up with my mortgage payments. Jessica and I fight about money constantly. I see you in this house, the same house Dad bought you 30 years ago, paid off and perfect, and you're managing just fine on your own. Meanwhile, I can't even figure out how to help my own kid with college applications without feeling overwhelmed. So, you decided the solution was to make me feel incompetent? I decided the solution was to convince myself that you needed help so I could feel useful for once. Like maybe I could be the one taking care of you, instead of always feeling like the disappointment. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. That's not what we discussed. Isn't it? Michael turned to his wife. When we first talked about Mom maybe needing more help, what was the first thing you said? I said we should make sure she was safe. After that, you said maybe if she was in a place with activities and other people, she'd be happier. But what you really meant was that maybe if she was somewhere else, we wouldn't have to feel guilty about not visiting more often. That's not fair, Jessica protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Carmen spoke up. What would fair look like to you, Jessica? Jessica looked startled to be addressed directly. I don't know what you mean. I mean, if you could design a situation that was fair to everyone in this room, what would that look like? I just want Michael to stop feeling like he's never good enough, Jessica said after a long pause. I want him to stop comparing himself to his mother and feeling like he's failing. I want us to be able to have dinner here without him spending the whole drive home talking about how he should be more like her. I felt something shift in my chest, a recognition of pain I hadn't known I was causing. You think I make you feel inadequate? Not on purpose, Michael said quickly. But Mom, you do everything right. You always have. Perfect house, perfect garden, perfect finances. Dad used to joke that you could run a small country if they asked you to. Your father also used to joke that I was too stubborn to ask for help when I needed it. Do you need help? Michael asked, and for the first time in months, I heard genuine curiosity in his voice instead of manipulation. I looked around the room, at Carmen, who had become such an important part of my life, at Jessica, who was clearly struggling with her own guilt and frustration, at Michael, who looked like he was finally ready to have an honest conversation. I need help understanding why my son felt like he had to lie to me instead of just talking to me, I said. I need help figuring out how we got to a place where you felt like you couldn't tell me you were struggling. Because you never struggle, Jessica said. At least, you never show it if you do. Carmen cleared her throat. Maybe this is a good time to tell them about last winter. I felt my face flush. Carmen, tell us about what? Michael leaned forward. I sighed, realizing that if I wanted honesty from them, I needed to offer it first. Last winter, after that ice storm in February, I couldn't get out of the house for almost a week. The steps were too slippery, and I was afraid I'd fall. Why didn't you call us? Michael asked. Because I knew you'd worry, and I knew Jessica would start talking about how this proved I shouldn't be living alone. Jessica opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. I ran out of milk on the 3rd day, I continued, and my blood pressure medication on the 5th day. I was too proud to call you, and too scared to risk the steps. What did you do? Michael's voice was soft. I called Carmen. She came over with her grandson's ice cleats and helped me get to the pharmacy. Michael looked at Carmen with something like gratitude. Thank you. The point is, I said, I do need help sometimes, but I need to be able to trust that asking for help won't be used as evidence that I can't take care of myself anymore. And I need to be able to admit I'm struggling without feeling like I'm disappointing you, Michael said. Carmen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my garden. Seems like you both need the same thing, permission to be human. We sat with that for a moment, the truth of it settling around us like dust after a storm. So where does that leave us? Jessica asked finally. Before I could answer, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. It was Riverside Manor, the assisted living facility Michael had toured, the one I was supposedly moving into next month. All four of us stared at the ringing phone, and I realized that whatever we decided in the next few minutes would determine whether we could rebuild the trust that had been broken, or whether this family would never quite recover from the lies we'd all been telling ourselves. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail, but the damage was done. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken questions. Mom? Michael said carefully. Was that about the place I looked at? I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. They've been calling about finalizing arrangements. I told them I needed more time to think. Jessica shifted in her chair. Wait, you actually considered it? I considered a lot of things after I read those messages, I admitted. I wondered if maybe you were all right. Maybe I was being stubborn and selfish, holding on to this house when it would be easier for everyone if I just went somewhere with staff to help me. That's not what we want, Michael said quickly. But it's what you talked about, I replied. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we need to be able to talk about all the possibilities without it feeling like a betrayal. Carmen returned to her seat, her expression thoughtful. When my mother was deciding whether to move in with me or stay in her apartment, she said something I'll never forget. She said the hardest part wasn't being afraid of losing her independence. It was being afraid that asking for help meant she'd failed at being a mother. That's exactly it, I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I spent 40 years taking care of everyone else. The idea that I might need taking care of feels like admitting I didn't do enough when it was my turn. Michael reached across the space between us and took my hand. Mom, you taking care of us doesn't mean we can't take care of you. That's not how love works. But I don't want to be a burden, I said, the words catching in my throat. You're not a burden, Jessica said firmly. But we've been acting like you might become one, and that's not fair to any of us. Carmen leaned forward. What if we stopped thinking about this as all or nothing? What if there are options between completely independent and nursing home? Like what? I asked. Like being honest about what you need help with and letting people help you with those things, Carmen said. Like Michael being able to say he's worried about you without you hearing it as criticism. Like Jessica being able to express concern without it sounding like she's trying to control your life. Jessica looked surprised. Is that how I sound? Sometimes, I said gently. But I understand why. You're scared too. We're all scared. Michael squeezed my hand. I'm scared something will happen to you and I won't be there. But I'm also scared of taking away your choices because of my fear. And I'm scared of becoming helpless, I said. But I'm also scared of pushing you away because I'm too proud to admit when I need help. The phone rang again. This time it was Michael's phone, and we could all see Riverside Manor on the screen. They're probably calling you because I haven't called them back, I said. Michael looked at the phone, then at me. What do you want me to tell them? It was such a simple question, but it felt monumental. He was asking what I wanted, not telling me what he thought was best. I want to tell them that we're not ready to make that decision yet, I said. I want to tell them that we need to figure out some other things first. Michael declined the call and looked at me expectantly. I want to try something different, I continued. I want to try being honest with each other about what we're afraid of and what we need. I want to see if we can figure out a way for me to stay in my home longer, but with more support. And I want to be able to talk about assisted living as one option among many, not as a threat or a failure. What would that look like? Jessica asked. I thought about it. Maybe it looks like me calling you when I need help instead of calling Carmen and swearing her to secrecy. Maybe it looks like you being able to worry about me out loud without me getting defensive. Maybe it looks like us having regular conversations about how things are going, instead of letting problems build up until someone finds text messages they weren't supposed to see. Carmen smiled. That sounds like a pretty good start. But what about the practical stuff? Michael asked. The grocery shopping, the house maintenance, the medical appointments? We figure it out together, I said, week by week, month by month, and if it gets to be too much, we revisit our options, including Riverside Manor, if that's what makes sense. Jessica looked relieved. So, we're not making any big decisions today? We're making one big decision, I said. We're deciding to trust each other enough to tell the truth. Even when it's uncomfortable. Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and frowned. What is it? I asked. It's from David, he said, mentioning his best friend. He says he heard from his mom that there's been some kind of incident at Riverside Manor. Something about the health department investigating them. We all stared at each other, and I felt a chill run down my spine. If I had made the decision to move there out of hurt and pride, if we hadn't had this conversation today, I might have been walking into a situation none of us knew anything about. Maybe, Carmen said quietly. Everything happens for a reason. But as Michael read more of the text message, his expression grew increasingly troubled, and I realized that whatever was happening at Riverside Manor might affect more than just my housing decision. Michael's face had gone pale as he continued reading. The afternoon light streaming through my living room windows suddenly felt harsh, casting sharp shadows across his worried expression. What else does it say? Jessica asked, leaning forward in her chair. Michael cleared his throat. David says his mom got a call from the health department this morning. Apparently, there's been an outbreak of some kind of infection at Riverside Manor. They're investigating the facility's sanitation practices and medication management. I felt my stomach drop. Just an hour ago, I had been seriously considering that place as my new home. The brochures were still scattered across my coffee table, their glossy photos of smiling residents now seeming almost mocking. How bad is it? Carmen asked, her voice tight with concern. He doesn't have all the details, but they've had to transfer several residents to the hospital. The health department is conducting a full investigation. Michael set his phone down and rubbed his forehead. Mom, I'm so sorry. If we had pressured you into making a quick decision. But we didn't, I said firmly, though my hands were trembling slightly. And that's exactly why we needed to have this conversation today. We almost made a decision based on fear and hurt feelings instead of taking the time to really think things through. Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. I keep thinking about how close we came to having you tour that place next week. What if they had convinced you to move in quickly? The weight of that possibility settled over all of us. I looked around my living room, taking in the familiar worn spots on my favorite armchair, the family photos covering the mantel, the afternoon sunlight filtering through curtains I had hung 20 years ago. This morning, this room had felt like a prison of my limitations. Now it felt like a sanctuary. This is exactly what I was afraid of, I admitted, making a major life decision when we were all emotional and not thinking clearly. When you found those text messages, Carmen, part of me wanted to prove I could be independent by moving out immediately. I wanted to show you all that I didn't need to be anyone's burden. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. But you're not a burden, and I should never have used that word. I was frustrated and scared, and I said something horrible that I didn't mean. I know that now, I said. But in the moment, it felt like confirmation of my worst fears about getting older. That I was becoming someone people had to tolerate rather than someone they wanted to be around. Michael was still staring at his phone, though the screen had gone dark. I keep thinking about all the things we didn't know to ask. We looked at the pretty dining room and the activities calendar, but we didn't think to research their health and safety record. We didn't ask about staff turnover or inspection reports. Because we were making an emotional decision instead of a practical one, Jessica said. We were all so caught up in trying to fix the immediate problem that we weren't thinking about the long-term implications. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my small backyard garden. The tomato plants I had worried about this morning were still there, still needing my attention. The thought of leaving them behind had made me sad, but I had pushed that feeling aside, telling myself that giving up my garden was just part of getting older. You know what's strange? I said, still looking outside. When I was considering Riverside Manor, I kept thinking about all the things I would have to give up. My garden, my independence, my privacy. But I told myself that was just the price of getting older, that I didn't have a choice. But you do have choices, Carmen said. Maybe not all the same choices you had when you were younger, but you still get to decide what's important to you and what you're willing to compromise on. I turned back to face them. That's what I want to focus on. Not what I can't do anymore, but what I still can do and what support I need to keep doing it. And I want us to make those decisions together as a family, with all the information we need. Michael finally looked up from his phone. So, what's our next step? Well, first we call Riverside Manor and tell them we're no longer interested, I said. And then we start researching what other options are actually available. Home health aides, meal delivery services, transportation options, things that would let me stay here longer but with more support. And we set up regular check-ins, Jessica added. Not crisis meetings when someone finds upsetting text messages, but planned conversations about how things are going and what adjustments we might need to make. Carmen nodded enthusiastically. Like a family meeting once a month, where we can all be honest about what's working and what isn't. That sounds perfect, I said. And if there comes a time when staying here really isn't safe or practical anymore, we'll research assisted living facilities properly. We'll visit multiple places, check their records, talk to current residents and their families. Michael's phone buzzed again, and this time when he looked at it, his expression shifted from worry to something closer to alarm. What now? I asked. It's another text from David, he said slowly. The health department investigation is expanding. They're not just looking at Riverside Manor anymore. They're investigating the entire chain of facilities that owns it. Apparently, this isn't an isolated incident. The room fell silent as the implications of this sank in. We had been so focused on the immediate crisis at Riverside Manor that we hadn't considered the possibility of a larger, systemic problem. And if this was affecting multiple facilities, how many other families were facing the same uncertainty we were? But as I looked at Michael's troubled expression, I realized there was something else in the text message that he hadn't shared yet. Something that was making him look not just worried, but genuinely frightened. "Michael," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "What else did David say?" Michael's hands were actually shaking as he held his phone. "He says the investigation has uncovered financial irregularities, not just safety violations, but potential fraud. They think the company has been taking government payments for services they weren't providing, and there might be criminal charges." Jessica leaned forward in her chair. "What does that mean for the residents who are already there?" "That's just it," Michael said, his voice getting higher with stress. "David doesn't know. The state might have to step in and relocate everyone if the facilities get shut down. And if that happens, all those people will be scrambling to find new places, which means the waiting lists everywhere else are going to get even longer." Carmen had gone pale. "So, even if we wanted to find a different facility for your mom later, there might not be any openings anywhere?" The weight of this revelation settled over all of us. I sank back down into my chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. Just when we thought we had a handle on the situation, just when we'd figured out a plan that felt manageable, the ground had shifted under us again. "How many facilities are we talking about?" I asked. Michael scrolled through the message. "David says at least 12 in our state, maybe more. The company owns over 100 nationwide." 100, Jessica repeated numbly. "That's thousands of residents who might need to be relocated." I watched my children's faces as they processed this information. Michael looked like he was on the verge of panic, that same expression he'd worn as a little boy when he'd broken something valuable and was trying to figure out how much trouble he was in. Jessica had that furrow between her eyebrows that appeared whenever she was trying to solve a problem that felt too big for her to handle. But it was Carmen's reaction that surprised me most. Instead of looking more worried, she actually seemed to be getting calmer, more focused. "Okay," Carmen said slowly. "So this is bigger than we thought. But that doesn't change what we need to do right now, does it? We still need to research home health options. We still need to set up those family meetings. We still need to make sure Margaret has the support she needs to stay here safely." "But what if we can't find anywhere decent later?" Michael asked. "What if by the time Mom really does need residential care, all the good places have waiting lists that are years long?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Carmen said firmly. "We can't make decisions based on what might happen in some hypothetical future. We have to work with what we know right now." I felt a surge of gratitude toward Carmen. While my own children were spiraling into worst-case scenarios, she was keeping us grounded in the present moment. "Carmen's right," I said. "This news is upsetting, but it doesn't change our immediate situation. If anything, it confirms that we made the right choice not to rush into Riverside Manor." Jessica nodded slowly. "And maybe it means we should be more thorough in our research going forward. If this kind of thing can happen to a chain of facilities, we need to know what warning signs to look for." "David might be able to help with that," Michael said, looking at his phone again. "He's been following this investigation closely. He might know what questions we should be asking." "That's a good idea," I said. "But Michael, I need you to take a breath. You're getting that look you used to get before your math tests in high school?" Despite everything, Michael managed a small smile. "I just want to make sure we don't mess this up, Mom. I want to make sure you're okay." "I know you do, but you can't protect me from every possible problem in the world. Some things are just out of our control, and we have to be okay with that uncertainty. Carmen was nodding. And honestly, this investigation might end up being a good thing in the long run. If these facilities were really providing substandard care and committing fraud, it's better that gets exposed now rather than later. You're right, Jessica said. It's just scary to think about how many people might have been affected. We sat in contemplative silence for a moment, each of us processing the implications of this expanded crisis. I found myself thinking about all the other families who were probably having conversations similar to ours right now. All the other adult children who were trying to figure out how to care for aging parents in a system that seemed increasingly unreliable. Michael's phone buzzed again, and this time, when he looked at it, his face went completely white. "What now?" Jessica asked, but her voice had taken on a note of dread. Michael looked up at us with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and disbelief. "David says the FBI just arrived at Riverside Manor." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. FBI, at Riverside Manor, the place where I had almost moved just days ago. Carmen reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her fingers were warm against my suddenly cold skin. "Margaret, breathe," she said quietly. I realized I had been holding my breath. The kitchen, which had felt cozy and safe moments before, now seemed to tilt slightly, as if the foundation of everything we thought we knew was shifting beneath us. Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. She began pacing the small space between the kitchen counter and the table, her movements sharp and agitated. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Mom, you could have been there. You could have been living there right now when the FBI showed up." Michael was still staring at his phone, his face pale and drawn. "David says there are 3 black SUVs in the parking lot, and news vans. Local news is already there." "News vans," Jessica repeated, stopping mid-pace. "This is going to be all over the evening news. Everyone's going to see this." I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. "What does this mean? What does it mean when the FBI shows up at a nursing home?" Carmen squeezed my hand tighter. "It means they found something serious enough to warrant a federal investigation. Financial crimes, maybe. Or if the conditions were bad enough to constitute abuse or neglect on a large scale." The implications of that settled over me like a heavy blanket. I thought about the cheerful tour guide who had shown me around Riverside Manor, pointing out the activities room and the garden area. I thought about the residents I had seen, sitting in wheelchairs in the hallway, looking lost and forgotten. Had they been suffering? Had their families trusted this place to care for their loved ones, only to have that trust betrayed? "I feel sick," I said, and I meant it. My stomach was churning, and not just from the shock of the news. Jessica stopped pacing and looked at me with wide eyes. "Mom, what if we hadn't found those text messages? What if we had gone through with the original plan? You would be there right now." "But we did find them," Carmen said firmly. "And Margaret isn't there." Sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to, even when it doesn't feel like it at the time. Michael finally looked up from his phone. "I keep thinking about that woman who gave us the tour. She seemed so nice, so professional. Do you think she knew? Do you think she knew what was really going on there?" "We'll probably never know," I said. "And maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that we're here, together, trying to figure out what comes next." But even as I said the words, I could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on all of us. If Riverside Manor with its gleaming brochures and professional staff, could be the subject of an FBI investigation, then how could we trust any facility? How could any of us know what was really happening behind the carefully maintained facades? Jessica sat back down, but her leg was bouncing under the table, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. This changes everything, doesn't it? I mean, how do we even begin to look for other places now? How do we know what questions to ask? We start by not panicking, Carmen said, though I could hear the tension in her own voice. Yes, this is scary. Yes, it makes the whole process more complicated, but it doesn't change the fact that there are good facilities out there, places where people are well cared for and treated with dignity. Michael was scrolling through his phone again. David says the FBI agents are going into the building now, with boxes. They're carrying boxes. Evidence, Jessica said grimly. They're collecting evidence. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to center myself. When I opened them, I looked around the table at these three people who had become so important to me over the past few weeks. Carmen, steady and wise, who had helped me navigate this whole process with grace. Michael, anxious but caring, who worried about me even when his worry sometimes made things harder. Jessica, protective and fierce, who wanted to shield me from every possible harm. I need to say something, I began, and they all turned to look at me. This is scary, yes. It's unsettling, and it makes everything more complicated. But I also need you all to know that I'm grateful. Jessica frowned. Grateful? Mom, how can you be grateful about this? Because if this hadn't happened, I might never have known what my life could look like. These past few days, staying here with Carmen, having you both visit every day, feeling like part of a family again, instead of just someone who needs to be managed and placed somewhere safe, it's shown me something I had forgotten. Carmen's eyes were soft with understanding. What's that, Margaret? That I still have choices. That I still have a voice in what happens to me. That even at my age, even with my limitations, I can still be part of something meaningful. Michael set his phone down on the table, face down. You're right, Mom. I've been so focused on finding the perfect solution that I forgot the most important thing is what you want. And what I want, I continued, is to take this one day at a time. Maybe that means staying with Carmen a little longer while we figure things out. Maybe it means looking at different options, ones we hadn't considered before. But whatever it means, I want us to decide together, as a family. Jessica reached across the table and took my other hand. Okay, yes, we can do that. But just as I was beginning to feel like we had found our footing again, Michael's phone buzzed insistently against the table. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted once more. What is it now? Carmen asked. Michael picked up the phone, his face growing increasingly troubled as he read. David says the news crews are interviewing families, people whose relatives lived at Riverside Manor, and Mom. He looked up at me with an expression of deep concern. Some of them are talking about suspicious deaths. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire we couldn't see but could suddenly smell everywhere. Suspicious deaths. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, and it wasn't just fear for myself anymore. It was the weight of realizing how close I had come to something I couldn't even fully comprehend. Carmen's kitchen, which had felt so warm and safe just moments before, suddenly seemed too small. The cheerful yellow walls that had comforted me these past days now felt like they were closing in. Outside, I could hear a car door slam, and we all flinched at the sound. How many families? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael scrolled through his phone, his jaw tightening with each line he read. David says at least 6 so far. Families who thought their relatives died of natural causes, but now they're wondering. There was an 83-year-old woman last month who died suddenly after being healthy. A man who was supposed to go home the next day but had a heart attack in the night. Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against Carmen's hardwood floor. She walked to the window and peered through the curtains, then quickly stepped back. There are more cars now, and I think I saw someone with a camera. We should stay away from the windows, Carmen said quietly. She got up and moved through her small living room, closing the blinds with careful, deliberate movements. The house grew dimmer, and somehow that made everything feel more real and more frightening. I found myself thinking about Mrs. Patterson, the woman who had been in the room next to the one they had shown me during my tour of Riverside Manor. She had seemed so frail, but her eyes had been bright when she smiled at me in the hallway. I wondered if she was still there, if she was safe, if her family was getting phone calls like we were. "Mom, are you okay?" Michael asked, and I realized I had been quiet for too long. "I keep thinking about the people I met there," I said. "During the tour, there was this woman, Mrs. Patterson. She seemed so sweet, and the staff member who showed us around, she seemed genuinely caring. It's hard to believe that place could be dangerous." Carmen returned to the table and sat down heavily. "That's what makes it so frightening. Evil rarely looks like what we expect it to look like. It hides behind kind smiles and clean facilities and proper paperwork." Jessica came back from the window and sat down, but she was restless, her fingers drumming against the table. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if we had gone through with it. If you had moved in there last week, like we originally planned." "Don't," I said firmly. "We can't think like that. We can't torture ourselves with what-ifs." But even as I said it, I was thinking the same thing. The timing felt surreal. If I hadn't found those text messages, if I hadn't been hurt and angry enough to leave, if Carmen hadn't opened her door to me, I might be there right now. I might be in danger, or worse. Michael's phone buzzed again, and this time he looked at it with resignation rather than anxiety. "David again. He says the police are asking if any families want to come forward with concerns about their relatives who were residents there." "Do we?" Jessica asked. "I mean, nothing happened to Mom, but should we tell them about our experience, about the tour, about what we were planning?" I considered this. Part of me wanted to help in any way I could, to be useful in making sure no one else got hurt. But another part of me just wanted to stay hidden in Carmen's safe, quiet house until all of this was over. "What would we tell them?" I asked. "That we almost made a terrible mistake but didn't?" "Maybe that's important," Carmen said thoughtfully. "Maybe they need to understand how convincing this place was, how it fooled families who were trying to do the right thing." Michael set his phone aside and looked at me directly. "It's your choice, Mom. Whatever you want to do, we'll support you." I felt a flutter of gratitude at those words. Whatever you want to do. When was the last time someone had said that to me? When was the last time I had felt like my opinion was the one that mattered most in decisions about my own life? "I think," I said slowly, "I'd like to help if I can, but not today. Today I just want to stay here with all of you and be grateful that we're safe." Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. "That sounds perfect." Carmen stood up and moved toward the kitchen. "I'm going to make us some tea, something calming, and then maybe we can figure out what we want for dinner. Something normal and comforting." As she busied herself with the kettle and cups, I looked around at my family. Michael, no longer frantically checking his phone but sitting quietly, present with us. Jessica, protective but not panicked, ready to face whatever came next. Carmen, steady and nurturing, making her home our refuge. "You know what I realized?" I said. "This whole experience, as frightening as it's been, has given me something I didn't expect." "What's that?" Michael asked. "It's shown me that I'm stronger than I thought I was, and that I have more choices than I believed. A week ago, I felt like my only options were to be a burden to you kids or to go quietly into whatever facility you chose for me. Now I know that's not true." The kettle began to whistle, and Carmen poured the hot water over tea bags that smelled like chamomile and honey. Outside, I could hear more cars arriving, more voices, the sound of a community reckoning with something terrible. But inside Carmen's kitchen, we were safe, we were together, and we were figuring out how to move forward. "So, what do we do now?" Jessica asked. I accepted the warm cup Carmen handed me and breathed in the soothing steam. "Now we take it one day at a time. We help the police when we're ready. We look at other options for my living situation, but without the pressure and panic we felt before. And we remember that we're a family, and families take care of each other." Michael nodded, and for the first time in days, he looked truly calm. "I like that plan." As evening settled around Carmen's house and the sounds outside gradually quieted, I realized that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to the best discoveries about ourselves. I had found my voice, my family had found their way back to really listening to me, and we had all learned that love isn't about making decisions for someone else. It's about making decisions together.